Welcome to episode 34 of the Princeton Podcast, produced by the podcast production team at HG Media, providing audio and video production services here in Princeton since 1999. In this episode, our Princeton Podcast host, Mayor Mark Freda, welcomed Jon Bucchere, Princeton Police Chief. In addition to discussing Chief Bucchere's lifelong involvement with the Princeton community, Mark and Jon discussed the evolution of policing here in Princeton from Jon's 24-year history as a member of the Princeton Police Department. A lot has changed to keep Princeton at the forefront of modern police practices. So without any further introduction, let's join our host, Mark Freda, and his guest, Princeton Police Chief Jon Bucchere, for episode 34 of the Princeton Podcast.
Jon, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Mayor.
Appreciate you being here. So how's it going being the relatively new chief of police of the Princeton Police Department, Jon?
It's going great. I'm really starting to enjoy the new role. In the beginning, I would say that it felt like a lot. It was, nervous to be in the new role. I guess, there was a part of me that felt, maybe a little overwhelmed. And I would say, day by day, it's getting a little bit easier. I'm becoming a little more comfortable.
Yeah, well, there is a lot of responsibility there. But so what's a typical day for a police chief?
So a typical day, I would arrive at work before 8, and what I try to do in maybe the first hour or so of my day is to walk around the police department and, say good morning to everybody and kind of get a feel for what's going on, maybe what happened the night before or what's going on that morning. And I had gone to a leadership class months ago, and one of the main takeaways was how important that part of the day is. And, it shows that you're engaged. It shows that you care. And it's a good way to get to know, people and see how things are going. So I would say I spend my first hour or so doing just that. And, after that, I usually make my way to my desk and try and tackle the email, which can be daunting. Email correspondence is a lot. So I'll cut through my emails, and then, a very important part of my day after that would be taking a look at our CAD system to see what types of calls for service we had gone on in the last, 12 to 24 hours. And then if there's anything interesting or peculiar that I find, I'll go seek out some more information. And then beyond that, I just have meetings at the county level, at the state level, and at the municipal level that occupy a lot of my time.
Yeah, we all seem to, depending what level you're at, get pulled in. I think that the more you move up the ladder, the more meetings you get sucked into, and ties up your day quite a bit.
No doubt about it.
So, Jon, how long have you been a member of I'll say, how long have you been a member of the police department, but realizing there used to be 2 police departments, now there's the one.
Right. So I was a former borough police officer, and I was hired in August of '99. So it's funny. I don't feel like I'm one of the most senior officers on the department. I still feel young. But when I look at my badge number and I look at all the younger officers, it makes me realize just how long I've been here. Although there are a few officers that have been here longer. But yeah, I'll finish my 24th year in August.
Yeah. So what different roles, or could you share some of the different roles that you've had within the police department during your career?
Sure. So I was hired, and right off the bat, I was a patrol officer for maybe 4 or 5 years before I was switched from that role into a more specialized role in community policing. In the community policing role in the former borough, one of my main responsibilities was that of a DARE instructor. So in that role, I got experience going into our schools and working with the school administration and teaching the students about the perils of drug use and what have you. And I really enjoyed that. It's very different than what a typical police officer would do on the street. So I did that for a few years and then was moved into the role of a detective. That role was interesting and rewarding. So as a detective, you see cases from a different point of view, and you're afforded the ability to work those cases. You have time, you have the benefit of time, and you can examine, different crimes and work with different ways to solve crime in Princeton. So I did that for a little over a year before I was promoted to sergeant. At the sergeant level, I was tasked with supervising a patrol squad and a civilian dispatcher or dispatchers, and that was very rewarding as well and very challenging. I was a sergeant for a few years a patrol sergeant before I was moved inside to supervise the Safe Neighborhood Bureau, and that would have been in the consolidated Princeton. So I did that for a couple of years before I made lieutenant. As lieutenant, I was in charge of the entire patrol division, and I oversaw 4 patrol sergeants, 4 corporals, over 30 patrol officers, and the civilian dispatch as well. I did that for a few years before I made captain. The police captain job, you basically oversee the entire department and report to the chief of police who's in charge of the day-to-day operations.
A lot to do there. So would one of those former roles, would one of those that you talked about be considered your favorite, or?
Yeah, absolutely. When my career is done, I will look back at my time as a patrol sergeant, and that undoubtedly will be what I remember the most, what challenged me the most, where I made the most growth, where I made the most mistakes, where I learned the most. For sure, without a doubt, being a patrol sergeant is the hardest, most challenging job as a police officer, in my opinion. And it's also the most critical job of a police officer in an agency. Much is asked of a patrol sergeant. You're required to make decisions at a moment's notice without the benefit of time. You're in charge of the entire town, while at times your superiors are home, and you have to make good choices. And so I would say, because of the challenges that I had, and because of the growth that I think I experienced, for sure, that would be my most rewarding position so far.
Yeah. So, John, did you grow up in this area, or where are you from?
So I was born in Princeton at the hospital, but I was raised in Hamilton, so just a stone throw away. Yeah. But as a kid, I played sports. I was always in Princeton, so it was always familiar to me.
Yeah. So what was the route for you to become a police officer? Is it something you always wanted to do, or just one day some light bulb turned on, or how'd that come about?
Yeah, so I'm a people person by nature. I enjoy relationships. I enjoy being around people. But what really paved my way into the profession was my brother. He became a New Jersey State Trooper, and I, just in my relationship with him, learned a lot about, the profession, what his responsibilities were. And during this time, I was in college. So naturally, I was trying to figure out, what I wanted to do. And I had this role model right next to me, living his best life as a police officer. And I guess it was during those college years where I got to witness my brother and, some of the things that he did, that I decided this is something that I think I could do for the rest of my life.
Always good to have a role model around.
It sure is.
So, have you set some goals for yourself as the new police chief? Some things that you're hoping to accomplish?
Excuse me, I have. So, right away, the first goal that I set was that I wanted to leave my mark. When I'm done here, I wanted to be able to say that there were things that I accomplished that hadn't been accomplished, changes that I made that were not just for the sake of making change, but good changes. And I believe to make progress, you need to make change, sometimes. Yeah. So those were my goals, to solidify my legacy as a police chief that, wanted to do a few different things that hadn't been done.
Yeah. So I don't know, this question's kind of similar, and maybe it's hard to break it apart from the question I just asked, but do you also have like another set of goals for the department?
I do.
Okay.
So I guess my first goal for the department would be to continue to grow. I think training is incredibly important, and I think that policing has changed. So I would say, my top priority for the department as far as goals go would be to continue to enhance our community involvement and to become more efficient and better able to handle different calls that require, where our community might require assistance in different crisis intervention.
Yeah.
And I think in order to accomplish that, we need to, focus on training and a few different things. Yeah.
Yeah, no, those are great goals. And I guess this next question kind of ties into that, is like, how has policing changed since you first started as a police officer? Because anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's changed dramatically. When I was first hired, policing was driven by, in many ways, how many tickets you wrote, how many arrests you made, quantitative measures that you could say, this is what I did in a 12-hour shift. Yeah. And over the course of my career, that philosophy has changed dramatically. And I think for the better. There's a balance. But in today's policing, it's less about statistics that you can point to with regard to stops and summonses and arrests, and more about how you're engaging with the community, how you're working with the community to solve problems, and your day is occupied with a focus on in those areas rather than the quantitative old school summonses and arrest.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a good difference for people to understand, but more critical for the police chief to understand, because how you run the department is obviously based on that.
Sure, but and I mentioned it before, but I'll just say it again. There has to be a balance. If you're out of balance, you're going to see problems, and there'll be unintended consequences. So the important thing is to have a police department that can be guardians of the community, be part of the community, be known in the community, but understand that their role is to protect the community. And in some cases, you have to issue summonses, you have to make arrests, you have to do those things. And if you can be balanced about the way that you do it, then you're hitting a home run.
Yeah. So for someone looking at a career as a police officer, what skills do they need today?
So I would say you have to problem solve. You have to be a critical thinker. You have to be a good listener nowadays. For sure, you have to be a good listener. Mental health is an issue in our communities. And when our officers are going to calls, they have to be able to communicate well with people. They have to be able to listen. They have to be empathetic. They have to be kind. Those are the qualities that we look for when we recruit right now. And I think that's changed over the years.
So one thing, I jotted down a note, one of your answers before, I think you talked about, or something popped in my head about shift work. So like what kind of shift does a patrol officer work? I mean,
so we work a 12-hour shift,
yeah.
our police department, and it's called a Pittman schedule. And our officers will work 2 weeks of days followed by 2 weeks of nights, and they're off every other weekend. But a 12-hour shift is a long.
It's a long shift.
It's a long shift,
especially if it's the night shift. That's got to be a tough toll on people mentally and physically to keep changing back and forth between days and nights. But it
is. In fact, we're examining it right now as we speak, our department, and we are trying to figure out, what the best, most practical shift would be. And it's not an easy, it's certainly not an easy, and I think that much of the department is divided on just that. You have a group of officers that feel as though if you did a shift for a month, that your body would adapt better and it'd be more healthy. And you have other officers that are, on the complete opposite side, would never want to do a month of midnights or days, and they prefer to switch every 2 weeks. In my career, I only knew the 12-hour shift switching every 2 weeks. But we're examining it. We're looking at it. I'm listening. And I believe we'll make a good decision, when the time comes.
Yeah. Well, it's just a challenge for any emergency service because you're needed 24 hours a day. So somebody's got to be there.
Right. So. And the size of the agency also comes into play because you're limited in certain ways. A bigger agency could do 10-hour days, or there's more options. And we're kind of stuck in the middle there.
Yeah. So my belief is that the Princeton Police Department is a really excellent department. I mean, I interact with the department, not just in my role as mayor, but through other things I do outside of that, with different emergency services in town. So what do you think makes that perception true, that it's an excellent police department?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mayor. I agree with you. I think we're an excellent department. I think what separates us from other departments is our ability to engage in the community, the relationships we have with our allied partners, the first aid squad, the fire department. We have tremendous relationships here in Princeton with everyone. In addition to that, our response time, I believe, separates us from other agencies. I think that we're incredibly responsive, and we just, we're a community policing. We've embraced the guardian mentality long before there was a push to do so. I think we were progressive years ago. President Obama had the task force on 21st century policing, and that document has become, I've said this a number of times, it's become the blueprint for policing and what works and the do's and the don'ts. But the Princeton Police Department had accomplished some of those goals long before that document was created. Which is a credit to our leadership, our past leadership under Chief Sutter and, followed by Chief Morgan. So I think that's what I would point to.
Yeah. So it appears to me that the department has seen a lot of retirements over the last 5 or so years. What are the challenges with bringing in what I think is a significant number of new officers?
Recruitment is definitely the newest and latest and biggest challenge that we're faced with. If I had to point to a few things that I think have impacted that, I would say that there have been a number of incidents on the national level that have impacted policing.
Yeah.
And George Floyd and a number of other different incidents that took a toll on policing. I think that the new normal is for police officers to retire earlier rather than stay and make long careers well past, the 25-year retirement. So we're seeing less and less officers stay 30 and 35 years or 40 years. Gone are the days of these officers that are doing that. And so when you combine those two things and you start to see officers retire at 25 years, there have been pension changes made to the pension system that could impact, the number of people that are applying or wanting to be police officers. I think those are all contributing factors to why numbers might be down with recruitment and selection. Right.
And so I guess you're probably in the recruiting mode pretty much all the time at this point.
Yeah. We just had a meeting yesterday where I had mentioned at our next public safety meeting, I want to discuss recruitment and selection and some changes that I want to make. We used to recruit once a year for a few months, and now it's become a full-time job. Yeah. And the way that we do it has to change. Otherwise we're not going to be successful. So we just finished up our last recruitment process and we hired 4 officers, as you know. Not a week later, we began the next one. And I said to the captain yesterday, we have roughly 50 applicants right now that have applied. I said, we can't afford to wait 4 or 5 months to let that number grow or see what that number does and delay the process. I said, I think it's never been done this way, but what I want to do is take those 50 and, kind of break up the process, move forward with those 50 while still accepting applications. And we've never done it that way, but I think if we're successful, and I plan to be, we'll be able to stagger our hiring and supplement the police department. This way we're not in dire straits 12 months from now if 4 people decide to leave.
Right. So you kind of have an active pipeline of people that hopefully make it through the process. Yeah,
that's the plan. But it takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of energy, and we have to be open to change. And I think I said earlier, and one of my responses, in order to make progress, sometimes you have to make change.
Yeah. I think you always have to be willing to look at however things have been done and, oh, well, maybe that's not the way it is anymore. So you need to be on top of paying attention to what are the trends in today's world. Things change.
Right. The other thing that I'd be remiss if I didn't add was that I want to recruit within Princeton. We have several officers that are from Princeton, that went to Princeton High School. One of our most recent hires was born and raised in Princeton, and I have a front row seat to the benefits of that. Yeah. And I want to put a lot of energy into recruiting and selecting people from this area. Yeah. And it's difficult and it's not easy, but I think we can change the department for the better if we're able to do it.
Yeah. Well, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I know that growing up in the community when I was much younger, the vast majority of the police officers in both the borough and township police departments were local. The section of the Princeton that I live in now used to be called Cop City, because there were so many police officers that lived within like a 6-7 block area.
I never knew that.
Yeah. I said, well, not that I'm that old, but I heard that somewhere. But so anyway, it is interesting. But I think it's the same as I feel like being on the governing body. The more people that have been here a long time, the better sense and perspectives they have to deal with things that are happening in the town, right? I mean, that institutional knowledge goes a long way. And if you grew up in the community and you're a police officer, I just think you have such a leg up because you already know a lot.
Yeah, it's a tremendous help. Yeah, for sure.
So along those lines, we talked about how challenging it is to recruit, and you have officers retiring and new people coming in, but there must be opportunities with the new officers also that allow you maybe to think of new ideas or new ways to do things that you can, use the newer officers to help make that happen.
Absolutely. And I would say that, that's also one of the biggest changes in policing. When I was hired, and for my first several years, I didn't really have a voice in the police department. It was, you kind of get your instructions, you go out and you do it. and you finish your day. Yeah. It's not the case anymore. The younger officer that comes in, they have ideas. It's a different generation of employees, so to speak. So as I mentioned in the beginning, how I spend my day walking around and talking to these different officers every morning, you glean a lot of information from the employees and different ideas and many of which we discuss during administrative conversations and we pivot and adjust and make changes and I think that the younger officers when they see maybe an idea that they had to fruition, it gives them a sense of ownership and it works. Yeah. So
yeah, well, it's always good to listen to the people that are doing the job day to day, right? I mean,
absolutely,
they have the front row seat. So.
Absolutely,
yeah. So we've talked many times. We've mentioned whether it's community policing, safe neighborhoods, things like that. So how does the department try to interact with the community? I mean, the officers are. I go to a number of events, obviously. And it's amazing how many different community events the police department's at, but maybe you could elaborate on that some.
Yeah, so, again, going back to the 21st century policing, without legitimacy in the community, without being seen and having a face in the community, you really can't accomplish anything. So there's a tremendous amount of emphasis that's placed on our people being involved. And it starts from the top down, and we can always do better. So, maybe I didn't mention it when you asked me what my goals were. My goals, one of my biggest goals is to be a present police chief, to show the department first that I'm willing to go to these events, whether it's on a Saturday or Sunday or at nighttime or, early in the morning or, to be there with them, not just sending them to the events. Yeah. And, when you're doing good when your people, the police officers, are at events that you didn't tell them to go to, and they just ended up being there. Yeah. That's one of the most rewarding things. And then social media has changed everything. So we have a very active footprint in social media. Yep. We could always do better, but our Nixle has close to 10,000 subscribers or more. Facebook and things like that. So I think we do a good job at promoting ourselves, but we also have requirements. So our patrol squads are required to each patrol squad is required to organize a community event. And in the beginning, we had to make sure, set calendar reminders and make sure that it was being done. We don't even have to do that anymore. Our officers look forward to these events and they're really cool, whether they're out of the box ideas too. Like one patrol squad might partner with the Little League and do an event for, opening day at the Little League. Mm-hmm. We have officers patrol squads that partner with Save, and they're walking dogs and, helping people in the community adopt animals. You name it. We've bagged groceries at McCaffrey's. We've washed cars, at, the Johnson Park Elementary School. And it seems like we're always trying to create our community involvement. And I think that our people, my hat's off to the officers that are organizing and coming up with these ideas, because they make us look terrific.
Yeah, no, I think they do. And if I'm a member of the community and I'm seeing police officers other than they're stopping by because I had a problem or there's a complaint or something, but they're actually just being normal people, so to speak. Mm-hmm. They're just interacting with you on a day-to-day basis. I think it's great for the department. It's great for the community. And it's more than just an image, all right? I mean, as you said, your officers are enthusiastic about doing this, and you can see that at events. They're not just standing there going, "Oh, I got to be here." They're involved.
Yeah. Years ago, this was when I was a patrol lieutenant, and this is when I noticed that we were embracing the change. We had officers come in and bag groceries at McCaffrey's, but they did it on their day off. So all came in, they represented us incredibly well. They bagged groceries for several hours. It was well received by the people loved it. Yeah. The McCaffrey's loved it. We have a partnership with McCaffrey's, it all goes back to community policing. And then a week or, 10 days later, I didn't see any, slips or, and none of the officers wanted to be compensated for the time that they spent bagging groceries on their day off. So that tells me that they bought in, to the philosophy, to the principles behind community policing, and it was really cool to see.
Yeah. Well, again, I think we have a really good police department. We have a lot of great officers. The town's very fortunate to be where it is with policing in Princeton.
I appreciate that's a great compliment.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor.
So, John, thanks for being with us today.
That was my pleasure. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us for the 34th episode of the Princeton Podcast, produced by the podcast production team at HG Media, providing audio and video production services here in Princeton since 1999. If you enjoyed this episode of the Princeton Podcast, please share it with your friends. Visit our website at princetonpodcast.com and be sure to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts.